What is the mechanism of fear? And then fear has many shapes and sizes, like anxiety. And then I think we need to bring up stress. What is fear when it gets stored in the body, and how is that released? Not just in one session, but continuously. So you're not just here as well to give a workshop or an experience. You might even have a chance to help build protocols where long-term process is at work, step by step. You need a kind of map, right? So that would be our goal. We want to understand fear in the body. How does fear act out in the body? And fear isn't just an emotion. I think it's a response mechanism. Fear is a conditioning, so that we tend to react to things happening in the world. Either we tend to argue, to fight, to run away, to freeze. So obviously the work that we do is a treatment for fear, because we can see that very often people walk out of the room and they're either less afraid or just super courageous. They're super relaxed, where a lot of the tension that was stored kind of leaves. I think these are important topics to bring up, because often we don't actually realize that we could be, in the intention of healing the fear, we could actually be adding sensitivity. So there are real feedbacks from people where we could, in fact, bring people more into these response mechanisms, and it's not easy to notice. So there are certain styles in the holding of the space that utilizes fear. Fear is, in fact, one of our allies in the process. Fear doesn't have to be fear. Once it flows, it becomes power, it becomes insight. But deep down, fear is also still fear, based on the mechanism. When you don't label it as that anymore, it has something to do with the heart, has something to do with the brain, and it has something to do with the chemicals. You want to go deeper than just the experience seeking. You don't want to be satisfied with the feedback that they give after the session, because when you study the physiology of change, a lot of changes that take place in the brain and the nervous system is actually very short term. Even though people have a fantastic experience, very often they would go back to how they were as they walk out the door. So you want to ask, okay, so if that can bring about short-term changes, what brings about long-term changes? Short-term would be electricity pathways. It could be neurotransmitters. What would be more long-term is endocrine systems. When you start looking at the glands, especially the endocrine glands, the thyroid, the thymus, the pituitary, the adrenal system, the sexual endocrine systems. For women, it's the ovaries, the uterus. For the male, it would be the testes. Like what's managing all of that? Because if you bring changes to those, then what you're talking about isn't just an experience. You're talking about metabolism. You're talking about immunity. You're talking about strengthening internal systems that can fight disease, that can wake up strong, which can influence mood, like thinking, process, behavior. So you're interested in long-term strategies as well. That's why innovations like the sleep playlists are interesting, because if people don't have to wait to come to you for workshops once in a while, it would be interesting for you to give them mechanisms that they can bring to home. It doesn't mean you're not needed. You still need to be there for the mirroring process so that whatever changes are going through, you can help bring observation to what's happening in the body. So that's maybe the opening spiel when you talk to doctors, that maybe you have something to say about fear. Maybe you can help map out fear. It's a hard topic to bring up because the body avoids pain and avoids fear. There's something called cognitive dissonance happening in the mind that's embodied as well. Cognitive dissonance is the mind and the body's inability to handle discomfort. So when there's something not so pleasurable happening, we try to avoid it. We don't like to look at it. We try to escape it. And that's actually one of the functions of the autonomic nervous system. It tries to hold homeostasis or balance, but the balance actually hides fear. So as soon as you trigger a sympathetic nervous system activity, the parasympathetic nervous system would try to slow down, let's say the heartbeat. Let's say your heart rate is speeding up. Your body, without you ordering it, would say, okay, I need to slow it down. So let's say your heart rate's going up because of epinephrine, because of cortisol. It would send out the relaxant chemistries like acetylcholine, serotonin. It could send out oxytocin in order to slow down what is speeding up. So the sessions that we hold can influence all of that. And that's why it's really important to have a diversity, a lot more tools than just the typical heart pumping system. Just purely activating people actually triggers the sympathetic nervous system a lot more than the parasympathetic nervous system. So you need interventions to get people to rest. Rest is really important. If you're going to activate them, get them to rest. If that rest isn't going to happen in between sessions, bring that rest mode inside the journey.
So if that rest, if you don't bring it outside the session, bring it within the
Yes.
days, right?
Yes.
But let's say we do an immersion
Yes.
for a full day or 2 days. Could we reconfigure the space, the time that we have to have that space of rest?
It's all up to us, all up to you. Rest has many different modalities. It could be not doing anything, having idle time, space in between. It could also be space for integrating like a lot of the information. And for most people, that is the most powerful. It's like, I feel whole. I feel like I'm clear. I feel like I can see everything from a big middle space. I feel like I can be in conversation in a way that's not push and pull, so dialogue could be rest for some people. It's not just alone time. It's all up to us. We need cross-modal techniques that's not always just going to be the energy. We have to understand everything in life actually matters. And what is important is usually what happens outside the journey than inside the journey. So the immersion needs to be a microcosm of what it means to live in a complete, holistic way. So we hold a space. So it's a good question, I think.
But would it, like what you were bringing up, like can we allow the rest to happen also
inside
the energy, inside the session? Like what's that balance in the journey where it's not all the time like that something needs to happen, and what's the dance between the stillness and the movement, for example? So how do we design or hold the space and see that there can be actually the energy can be in rest too, working on when we don't get the feedback from outside.
Okay, so let's look at the fear mapping. I think rest is interesting. We're bringing it up because it's the opposite of fear. Some people say the opposite of fear is love. When you do look at the autonomic nervous system, it's rest. What is fear? That's a really big question, isn't it? So where's fear in the body? That's where we start. Where's fear in the body? It has something to do with, let's list down.
Brain?
The brain, that's a really big one. Okay, we'll bring up the hypothalamus. Okay, good one. Who said heart? The heart has something to do with...
Solar plexus. That's connected.
exactly. Okay, let's just draw this because it's easier to do that. Solar plexus.
Also.
Okay, let's draw that. Let's say the solar plexus, the sun. Who else had a suggestion?
Sympathetic.
Okay, let's bring up the sympathetic nervous system. The breathing.
Parasympathetic as well.
This I usually make this look like a butterfly, but they're lungs. Who said something?
Parasympathetic.
Okay, well,
Opens doors and shut down.
yeah. Who else? What else is relatable to fear? Could be a body part, it could be a system.
Tension in the muscles.
Okay, muscular tensions.
Blood pressure.
Okay, tension, blood pressure, or BP would already be connected to this one.
Diaphragms in the body.
Diaphragms?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they'll
Yeah, okay, well that could be connected to here, diaphragm.
Yeah. Throat chakra. Yeah, but then there's a diaphragm in fact also.
So maybe the throat is up here above. Okay, so enough. This is enough to work with. Let's start with that. Let's go map that out. All right. Let's be really pragmatic here and go straight to the heart of it. So let's start with the heart. Let's make up another page. So I guess before we go to the heart, we need to look at the autonomic nervous system still.
The biggest
We still need to regard this. We talked about the craniosacral outflow and the thoracolumbar region, so at least we know that there's a region that manages fear. This is the region from T1 to L2, the thoracolumbar region. So from there would be extensions towards the heart, yes? There would be extensions towards the solar plexus. But we need to define the solar plexus. It's not that in general. The solar plexus can have the kidney, which is the urinary system. It could have the digestive part of the digestive system. And what else is there? What's on top of the kidney? The adrenal cortex, which is the adrenal medulla, the adrenal gland. That's what we usually mean.
Pancreas.
Yeah, the pancreas could be interesting as well. And even the liver is implicated there somewhere. So there are outflows of afferent and efferent neurons flowing from the thoracolumbar region to control fear. There would still be connections from the cranium and the sacrum that controls the heart, that controls the solar plexus, that helps to slow things down. But because we're speaking about fear, we would start with that. So I think let's go to the heart to try to understand something a little bit more local. Okay, so that's the heart. That's supposed to be managing love. What part of the heart would receive signals that helps it to determine whether I need to fight because I'm scared, or if I need to run away, or if I need to cope with some kind of problem?
Was it the SD node?
Yeah, okay, so it needs to have something to do with the timing. Because going back to, let's say, time and space, the heart, what does it do? It receives blood from, the lungs? And it could send energy or blood back to the rest of the body and to help to oxygenate the whole body, the brain and the rest of the body. So time and space would have to do with how fast or slow is the heart beating and how much blood can flow through. What's the cardiac output? What's the stroke volume? And then what's the heart rate? So we've been studying music, so we know that you can influence the heartbeat just by the way you touch bodies and the way you play certain types of music. This is the SA node. This contains the pacemaker. That contains the pacemaker. So we want to understand the mechanisms of the pacemaker, and in so doing, we would understand, how do I raise someone's blood pressure? How can I bring someone into heart attack levels during the sessions? How do I slow things down? What are the mechanisms of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system where that is concerned? This is the spine. Then it needs to connect to the heart. A lot of the connections in the heart would come from, somewhere near the heart to send messages to the SA node. So what are the signaling mechanisms to speed it up or to slow it down? From the point of view of the sympathetic nervous system, it has something to do with adrenaline. It's up to you if you want to call it adrenaline or epinephrine. I prefer to call it epinephrine. It's a more formal name. And also norepinephrine. This especially sends a signal the heart needs to beat faster, because let's say you're in a stressful or fearful situation and you need to be able to act upon it. So your blood needs to pump faster. So already that should be interesting for you, that you can manage time perception in people's minds and bodies just by learning how to send out epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, where is the epinephrine usually coming from? So it's not, the heart is receiving it in the SA node, but where would that be coming from? Epinephrine. What's the other word for epinephrine? So where is epinephrine coming from? Adrenaline, right? So it's actually coming from the adrenal cortex. So you can now implicate like something more closer to source of raising the heartbeat. You can touch the heart, but what's actually controlling the heart is it's the solar plexus. What's controlling the green chakra is the yellow chakra. Can you see now why in the trainings people tend to push the yellow, and then it actually affects the green? There's a connection there somewhere. So when you get to that, you now want to ask, what you want to do is you want to be like Sherlock Holmes. You want to be a detective. Okay, I want to know who's the culprit. You know, it's like a whodunit. It's like a mystery novel. It's like a Cluedo. Like, who did it? So who influences the adrenal cortex? Someone must be influencing the adrenal cortex. And don't tell me it's monsters. Don't tell me it's your mom. Don't tell me it's the government. Don't tell me it's Putin. Who is, or what is influencing the adrenal cortex? Who's in charge?
The brain?
The stress. What part of the brain? You can't just say the brain.
And hypothalamus?
Not yet. Like, who is... That's too big. Oh, yeah, it's the universe. It's connected to the amygdala, but the primary orders that allows the adrenal cortex to synthesize and send out adrenaline is called the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland. And if you want the exact chemical that it uses to send out to adrenal cortex, it's called ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. So you're a detective now. Okay, I'm getting closer. I'm getting closer. Is the pituitary gland the boss? Is it? Don't answer those who know. Is it the boss? Normally, how do you define the pituitary gland? It's the executive governor. It's the one managing all the glands, right? It's the crown chakra. But it's not actually true. There is another boss, a secret boss, a very small part of the brain that sends a signal to the pituitary gland. What is that? It's called the hypothalamus. Okay, hypothalamus. So, this is the amazing thing about this. In the past, scientists have implicated fear to be usually triggered by the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain. But recent findings are learning that the hypothalamus actually contains the most primal fear reflexes in the body, especially fear of predators, fear being eaten by large animals, fear of being raped, fear of being bullied. It's hiding in the hypothalamus.
When I was in high school, one of the statements I remember kept on saying for a long time from my science teachers, I love you from the bottom of my hypothalamus. I just say that for a long time.
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
That's something I gathered from the class, and I just started saying it, and it's so powerful. That if I feel anything, it's from the bottom, from the depth of my hypothalamus. And I don't remember why, but I just,
That's really huge, because what you will find out is the hypothalamus actually regulates all of your autonomic functions. It regulates breathing, it regulates heart rate, it regulates digestion, it regulates fear, it regulates hunger, it regulates thirst, it regulates sexual activity, it regulates the sleep-wake cycle, and especially it regulates the dream. And what we have realized within science is that music can regulate the hypothalamus. So do you see where this is going? You're finding the source. And what you're actually doing in your work is central in this way. You're able to regulate the autonomic nervous system. And everything you've been experiencing in the work, that you could see it. There's an axis called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. And when you study this, you will realize that there are other axes, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, which is your orange chakra stuff. And then you have your hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. So you want to heal people with thyroid problems? You can either go to the thyroid or you can go to the hypothalamus. And that's related to metabolism. The thymus is also part of that axis. You want to heal immunity? Do you go to the thymus or do you go to the hypothalamus? Do you want to heal fear? Do you go to the adrenal cortex or do you go to the hypothalamus?
It's crazy because now that you're saying this, like I healed myself a few years ago from I had a hypothyroid condition, and the doctors told me I would have to take L-Tirox for the rest of my life, and then for 3 years I was taking it. They were bringing up the things, and then I decided actually I don't want that. That's what.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was healing, I went through a moment where I was touching such crazy deep fears, and now I understand it was the hypothalamus.
Yeah.
So I was like,
Yeah.
Am I being harming to myself? But there were huge deep fears coming up.
Yeah.
And now it's just all very, I didn't know back then this. I was just doing it intuitively. But I can understand how that was so correlated with the hypothalamus now.
So the hypothalamus has so many regions. It's super small. It's almond shaped. It's super duper small. But there are all of these regions. The arcuate nucleus is responsible for ACTH, which is stress. Let's just go take a glance at all of the parts. all of these are subdivided. This is one of the most interesting in inner dance, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Remember, it manages the pineal gland to bring you into the dream state. So it's inside there. Trust or love is there. Birthing process is there. This is hugely important. This is the part that manages the adrenal system.
Is this a website or?
Yeah, where are you?
I can give you the link to this Prezi, so it's yours.
It's his promise.
It's like a PowerPoint that
Yes.
do the learning materials, but they're online.
So this is the
share
part that I said has fear,
the materials.
the ventromedial nucleus. Okay, so if you were to study the brain, at least study the one part. This should be exciting stuff. If you're recognizing what this is saying, it's huge. So let's focus on the yellow chakra, because this relates to the sessions when we're poking that place. I'm guilty. I used to sit in people. I used to stand in people. She knows.
He used to stand with me.
I mean, in Bahay Kalipay, yeah, in Bahay Kalipay, the ceilings are low, so I would stand in people's solar plexus, even grandmothers, and then I would push down. My technique there is when I feel something's pushing back, say, okay, you're there. So the more I push, it just keeps pushing back, so I just kept pushing. Because there's a lot of power. You know, there's a lot of power in the adrenal system. There are stories of moms whose kids would get trapped underneath cars and she can actually lift the whole car. That's like a ton, as opposed to moms aren't really strong technically. So when you tap into the yellow, there's a lot of power there. So adrenaline is not the only chemical secreted by the adrenal system. There's also your favorite one, starts with the letter C. It's cortisol. Okay, so cortisol, really interesting. Really interesting one. And we can see that cortisol, just like melatonin, has a scheduling system. It goes up and down. So I think it's actually interesting that in the inner dance or Kundalini process, people tend to raise cortisol levels, when in fact in the dream time, it's reduced. But we use cortisol in the sessions. We have to just be honest and look at it. What is cortisol doing in terms of the fear state? How does it actually help in raising fear levels, sometimes to the point of transcendence, where we can go past the fear? What does cortisol do? Cortisol does something to the heart. So we know it's a stress hormone. It's responsible for managing acute stress. So when you're stressed out, you're going to have high cortisol levels in your system, and that's usually when you're having a hard time sleeping, you have insomnia, and you feel burnt out, you feel like it's hard to trust, you feel like the mind just closes down and you can't think properly. Cortisol is very much implicated in that. Cortisol is doing something to the heart. Now, understanding that epinephrine and norepinephrine actually can speed up the heart rate, raise blood pressure, it's actually cortisol's fault. You know what cortisol does? Cortisol will meet epinephrine and they will double the effect. It will amplify epinephrine. It will modulate it in a way that it's gonna double the effect, maybe even more, so that when your heartbeat is going past 100, 110, 120, you can be sure that cortisol is having coffee with epinephrine. And they're working on the SA node. It's the epinephrine beta adrenergic receptors in the SA node that's receiving cortisol that's like shooting up epinephrine. So that's what we're doing in the sessions. When you're using certain music that's gonna boom, 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 you're actually amplifying the effects of epinephrine in the heart. That's why the heart starts to beat faster. So what's the point in that? To make people afraid? Yes, because it can confront fear. It can allow people to be afraid without being scared. Because at the same time, anyway, you're getting them to trust and to slow down. But I'm posing a danger here that when that becomes too habitual, if you raise cortisol levels in the blood because of super frequent sympathetic nervous system activations, and this is not happening, this is not being shared in trainings and whatnot, it actually leads to sleep disorders. It leads to anxiety. It leads to people starting to go into control mechanisms more. So that's where we need to understand ways in which we can slow that down if we're going to speed it up anyway. So that's the first mapping of fear I want you to look at that's happening in the body. There's another mechanism that's happening in the head area.
The epinephrine comes from adrenal cortex. Where does the cortisol come from?
It comes from the adrenal cortex as well. They both come from
pituitary.
Yes.
Hypothalamus.
It's both controlled.
What is there, like, simplified, what then how the information goes to hypothalamus? Like, am I linear thinking, like, okay,
Yes.
it's the root, and then how do the hypothalamus get the message that now I need to go to fear?
Anything that stimulates fear.
Like senses.
Yes, like super cold weather, a dangerous situation. Here's another one. Hypoglycemia. When you have low blood sugar, cortisol and epinephrine actually can result in gluconeogenesis. When you need more sugar in the blood, you need some kind of mechanism to raise it because sugar or glucose is what you use to activate the body. If you have low blood sugar levels, you'll be depressed. You'll have low energy. So there are actually healthy reasons why you would need cortisol. There's a reason why it's there. It's a technology to keep you alive, to make sure that you can run away from danger. Because even when you think of sugar, sugar is what you need in order to solve problems. When you have a lot of tasks during the day, you need to metabolize the things that you're eating so that you can transfer that into energy. You know, all those mechanisms to do with the mitochondria that burns glucose so that you have energy. If you have low blood sugar, there's something in your body that says it's too low. I'm hypoglycemic. So I need cortisol and epinephrine to help me raise blood sugar so that the heart can pump faster. Because depressed people, their heart rate is usually very low. It's very, very slow. So if you're experiencing hypoglycemia, you can't get up properly. You're pretty weak. You can't get out of bed. That's what homeostasis is.
Still, to somehow to get the whole picture, so like my senses are just like everything is alert, and then it's hearing, seeing, someone touching, like loudness, anything that will give me a message to go into that.
Yeah, because there's a whole map. It's like a whole network where dopamine, serotonin, orexin, histamine, they're all like talking to each other, and they're all actually meeting in the hypothalamic endocrine control system. Trying to catch up with my thought. Okay. I mean, one interesting way to look at this is this. Cortisol has a schedule because there's long conditioning of having been on Earth for the longest time. Who was it who saw the sun and the moon at the same time? They don't come up together at the same time. They don't like to be friends. When one is up, one is down. So when the sun is up, that's when you need your cortisol level to go up. When the moon is up, then cortisol level needs to go down. You're actually changing the schedule when you create the journey process. And you have to be aware of that.
Someone is like insomniac and doesn't sleep at night.
Yes.
During the day.
Yeah, you invert it.
They swap.
Yeah, you invert it.
People work by night.
Yeah. You know what causes high stress level? When you have a lot to do. Like in your mind, when you have this task and it's bottlenecked where, oh, I have so much to do and I don't know where to fit it. So now you can't sequence and order them properly anymore. So you can't sleep or you wake up really early because everything's stacked up and you can't order it. So it has something to do with time because of the pacemaker of the heart, the time cells in the heart is in the SA node. Cortisol and epinephrine actually help to speed up time. And the more that speeds up, the more you're in beta brainwave states. And you can't sleep when you have beta going on.
Sorry. So if you're hypoglycemic, like you said,
Hypo, yeah.
hypo, or you raise cortisol, but isn't that like then adding stress, or you're adding it just so it's balanced?
Well, you're not stressed out when you're hypoglycemic because then you're then when you're hyperglycemic, the autonomic nervous system will say, okay, I don't need that much glucose in my body anymore. It would inhibit the release and the synthesis of cortisol. Cortisol actually is synthesized from dopamine still, or epinephrine. There's a whole chain, from L-dopa. And there's actually another mechanism that happens up here that's just as interesting. So let's look at another page. What is the timekeeper in the brain? Where are the time cells in the brain? And this is recent findings. The time cells in the brain are called dopamine. Dopamine establishes speed in the brain. The basal ganglia is not a one part of the brain. It's actually a collection of parts in the brain. So let's go look at the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is in the...
What establishes speed.
Yes. There's a mechanism within the basal ganglia that establishes what's called basal rhythm. So the drum beat is actually also not just in the heart, but it's interrelated with the basal rhythm. And so that's in the middle of the brain, what you would call the subcortical region of the brain. The basal ganglia is there, and it's made up of several parts: the caudate, the putamen, and the globus pallidus. Okay, we won't go too much into details around these, but we'll explain them enough so we would know what's happening. So looking at these, do you remember, I think yesterday we spoke about the most numerous excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. What were they?
Glutamate.
Glutamate and... glutamate is the excitatory.
GABA calms it down.
GABA slows it down, right? GABA is inhibitory, glutamate is excitatory, and they balance each other. They balance each other so that when something's speeding up too fast, the other one would slow it down. And that's how time is measured. Okay, so this is going to be interesting because you can relate this to what's happening in the heart.
Wait, when you say, okay, and that is how time is measured.
Kept. In relation to your tasks, the things that you need to do, especially how you put things in order. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at fear and addiction and motivation all rolling into one, which is now managed in the brain. So a lot of that is happening in the basal ganglia. Remember those parts that I talked about, the caudate, the putamen, the globus pallidus? They're sending each other positive, negative, to try to balance each other. So remember in the heart, you had the epinephrine, norepinephrine mix. Try to balance things maybe with acetylcholine. And you had the modulator, cortisol, as the thing that amplifies the heart rate. Now, it's similar with the basal ganglia. Something will amplify.
In the heart though, the epinephrine is, it's not exciting it as well?
It is.
Okay.
It's actually more norepinephrine. There's more norepinephrine receptors in the SA node that speeds up the heartbeat, and cortisol amplifies that. So now our question is, if glutamate speeds up the basal rhythm because it's excitatory, GABA slows it down, something amplifies glutamate. What is that?
I don't know. Oh, just like cortisol.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's right there. It's dopamine. There's something below a lot of these structures. Let's write it down because it's an interesting and important.
But does dopamine also amplify GABA?
No, GABA just does its thing.
And when you say amplify, can you give me like a description of what do you mean by that?
It increases the potency of excitement that glutamate normally holds.
Because so glutamate is speeding it up,
Yes.
and amplification is more like.
Like it doubles, triples, like makes it times 10 even if. Okay, so we need to understand then what dopamine does. So let's look at dopamine now. Fresh page, because dopamine deserves its own page. What does dopamine do? So remember in our first day we mentioned one of our questions had something to do with expectation. Do you want to go into expectation? Do you want to understand how expectation works? So let's put it down. Someone is expecting something. Someone is not expecting something. So let's say there are these two scenarios where, okay, I'm expecting. I have an expectation. You have those participants, they're wanting. They're needing something. And then you have those participants, I'm just open. I'm just here. I'm present. I'm in the here and now. So there are 4 possibilities where someone might be expecting, and then there is a reward, or there's no reward. So let's say there's no reward, and then there's a reward. And then it's the same thing with the non-expectation, that there is no reward, and then there's a reward. Someone actually gets what they want. Let's start with the first. Let's see if we can do interesting things here. Okay, let's really ground this in the inner dance or Kundalini process. Okay, you have a participant and they're expecting something. What if they don't get what they want? What's going to happen with dopamine? There will be a dopamine depression. They won't get their hit. What if they were expecting and they get what they want? Dopamine goes up. The answer is there's no change. Now you have a person who's open. I'm just here. Why is there no change?
Why is there no change?
Because dopamine is an anticipatory drug. So if you're expecting and then you get a reward, we have to look at what happens to the other. Because we kind of explained this before in terms of the surprise or the shock.
But here is dopamine goes to, so it's suppressed and goes.
Yes.
Reward, you get reward.
No, but because you know what happens when you actually get a real reward? You don't get dopamine, you get endorphins.
Yeah.
Because dopamine is actually the
Just for wanting.
Expecting.
But you're expecting and you get it, but the moment you get it, why would you be rewarded? Because then you wouldn't be in a wanting anymore, you're in a having. So this will come clear when we see the other side. When you're not expecting, you're just there, okay, I'm just present. And then there's no reward, what happens?
It's nothing.
No change. And then when you're not expecting anything, and then when you get a reward, that is where there's a dopamine activation.
But not necessarily in regards to that experience, but the next one, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, just for that instance, because there was a shock. You remember, like, there has to be a surprise for the rerouting of dopamine from the nucleus accumbens, prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and the hippocampus.
Wait, can you say that again? So,
Motor functions, memory, emotions, and attention. So suddenly it goes to the basal ganglia. It's rerouted to the basal ganglia, and the basal ganglia will then send it to the, in the substantia nigra, to the caudate, the putamen, the globus pallidus, and suddenly you're getting the hit because you weren't expecting.
yeah.
So can you see the implications of this in the process? The weirdness here that many facilitators have to put up with, that the moment people get the hit, and then they get the hit, and then they get the hit, suddenly they're not getting the hit anymore. Because they're moving from not expecting to, I'm really expecting to get it again. It's a prison. It's a trap. Do you see how it kind of works? Relating it back to this one. Do you see the connection now? In terms of the animal brain and the reptilian brain. And can you see the role dopamine, glutamate, GABA has played in the human construct? This is the mechanism that helped us to order things, to organize things. Because every time you got a reward, you're like, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And every time you're not getting a reward, okay, there's an error there, and I want something new. I want something bigger. I want something pleasurable. And then when there was pain, then there's no change. So dopamine actually helped us to prioritize what is important, what's going to give more new things. Because we would get bored, like, what's new? But I already know that. I want to learn more. I want to build something bigger. So that's a really old mechanism that we're tapping into almost consciously right now based on the model of the energy process. So I'm really happy for you guys to get interested in this.
But this
Yes.
this is kind of different from when you did the surprise from the brainwave change, because that's not exactly a reward for them, right?
It's the same.
It's the same.
It's the same. When they didn't know what is going to happen, and most facilitators, their techniques are actually based on creating a surprise. You're sneaking things up that would give them something new that's a lot bigger than normally what they can handle.
Yeah, this is what you were saying yesterday with around the dimensions. No, you didn't want.
Yeah.
You wanted to. That's why you want to switch, because you want the
Yeah.
rebooting to happen.
Yeah, remember, like, juxtaposition,
Exactly that.
contrast, paradox, contradiction, giving them different genres, vibrations. Putting them in a body position where they can't really expect. Because when you're horizontal, you're actually in a very vulnerable place, whereas you're not able to usually act. When you're upright and when your eyes are open, you're ready to go. You're always in a dopamine system of trying to organize things, trying to make linear. But when you lay down, dopamine structures get all kind of weird because you're not like in that active. Yeah, Olenka.
Yes, the question is, well, we discussed that dopamine is a short-lived hormone, yeah? And
Yeah.
it's sort of like creating the short-lived pleasures.
Yeah.
It's not on
Yeah.
long-term, so I mean,
Yeah.
it's much more in favor
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
of joy, etc.
Mm.
But during the session, with this music,
Yeah.
you're just killing all the anticipation of the person. I mean, they anticipate something and then it not happens, like da 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 da,
Yeah.
and nothing happened, da 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 da, and nothing
Yeah, yeah,
happened.
yeah.
Okay? It's and it goes on and on and on. Finally, what we provoke, it's dopamine.
Yes. That's the normal, more basic mechanism that starter facilitators work with if they haven't realized some of the other neurotransmitters that would be interesting. I mean, from this point of view, GABA is actually one of the most favorable mechanisms to use because GABA facilitates deep learning. It facilitates memory. And as mentioned before, dopamine normally inhibits GABA. It inhibits the learning process. The more you have dopamine functions going up, the more your mind can't handle information. That's why we get confused sometimes. We can't hold information really well when we're too much in the energy process.
I don't know if the question applies to right now, but what is the approach when we work with different communities? For example, you mentioned you will be, or you are interested in bringing these to different spaces, like for example, when people is in prison.
Yeah.
So when you are in prison, I haven't been there yet, but
come over.
but I presume people in there will always be in the fight or flight mode, right?
Yes.
They need to survive in those environments.
Yeah.
So will that change the dynamic of a session in regards to what type of music we use?
We could still retain some of the more basic techniques that we hold because when we do get prisoners to lay down, we call them persons deprived of liberty, is the politically correct word. When they're in a judgmental, non-introspective, let's say emotion of shame or guilt, like I did the wrong thing, to get them to introspect, rerouting dopamine would still lead to insight. So remember the sleep stages, N1, N2, N3, going into REM. GABA is released the most during non-REM 3. Remember, slow wave sleep. So in the sessions that we hold, those deep spaces are so important to establish the REM state where you can see more. So let's say you're working either with prisoners or students or patients in a clinic to get to the root of a disease or fear. You want them to create longer connections synaptically in the brain. And for you to be able to do that, dopamine is only the entry point. Dopamine is good to reroute because it would get them to see things in a new way. But it's when GABA starts to do its thing. That's what allows them to think super clear. So there's a mistake when we try to bring out the catharsis too much for too long in a session. That's where we see why it's harder to receive images, to connect, let's say, the visual and the auditory function so that people can access the semantic function. Remember, there needs to be a connection there for meaning making to come. So when people are just feeling energy, when people are just getting the body movements, it doesn't always lead to insight or vision. So GABA needs to come into play. It would always go back to a certain machine that would release electricity in that part of the brain, the basal ganglia. So they kept pressing it, they kept pressing it, they kept pressing it. And then when they disconnected it, they stopped pressing it. So then they studied people who had addiction to methamphetamine, to other drugs, other foods, and it kept lighting up. It kept lighting up.
Even ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca, not so much, and certain cannabinoids, not so much. So there is a realization that those aren't actually addictive drugs to begin with.
I see people just hanging on ayahuasca.
Yeah.
I think they are addicted to the experience, not to the actual juice. Like they are.
How can they separate two of it?
Juice.
Because they get addicted to, like in inner dance, people can get addicted to inner dance because they're looking for the high of the experience seeking. So you get addicted to that because you think like a habit that I need this experience to be able to do something. But how ayahuasca works is not affecting chemically actually there. Like if I take it once, I don't get addicted to the actual symptoms, but I can get addicted to the
Let-
experience.
Let's look at very real terms. That's not so much the extreme. Let's say money. If you're in business, every time you make a sale, dopamine. Social media. When you make a post, every time you get like a like, boom. Gaming is the most dopamine addictive. It has something to do with winning. Can you see how this works now? People love games because you don't know if you're gonna win or if you're not gonna win. So just when you thought you were gonna lose, and then when you win, I mean, people love games. You know why? Because they can die, and then they can start over again. You can't do that in life. But when you thought you weren't gonna win, and then suddenly you won, you get a dopamine hit. So kids are so addicted to games, they're being doped up, and that's Darwin. That's the theory of natural selection, where life is a battle, life is a game, and you're here to compete. Everyone's now like warriors, they're soldiers, and that's why people are not getting serotonin received, which is a sign that people don't know how to collaborate. They're always competing with each other. Dopamine creates competitiveness. It makes people always comparing each other, like who's better, am I worse. People are always gaming, and it's actually dopamine, super old structure, beginning from deep time. Animals are gaming, cavemen were gaming, tribes were always gaming with each other. Are we going to win? Are we going to get beaten up? And then you go to high school, especially like in America. That's a game. That you need to be super strong to live in a place like downtown San Francisco, because you don't know if you're going to survive, that day. You're always like in some kind of game. So depending on where you live, you're actually helping a lot of people because you're getting people to step away from the game. Can you see the nature of the exhaustion? Related to dopamine, cortisol, epinephrine, glutamate. People are so exhausted, not even with winning, but just to survive. And then when they have a chance to actually access more resources, time and power, it goes to their head. Because dopamine is very, very addictive. It inspires taking. It inspires greed. Because it's powerful. It amplifies the heartbeat. And when you get that heartbeat, it feels blissful. It feels amazing. So now that we're finding more and more about these, we want to make adjustments. Let me give you just one interesting example. Have you heard of a hormone called prolactin?
Yeah.
Okay, prolactin is responsible for making mothers' breast milk. But when it's not doing that, and a lot of you are probably not nursing and breastfeeding now, who's breastfeeding? Okay, prolactin has another function. It's a beautiful function. It's an amazing function. There's another name for dopamine. There's another name for dopamine. It's kind of like my name. It's called PIH, prolactin inhibiting hormone. And its other name is dopamine. So dopamine actually inhibits the production of prolactin. Do you need prolactin if you're not breastfeeding? No. But do you need it actually for another thing? It still has something to do with the color white. It's responsible for myelination, for producing something like, this is a really expensive word, but if you really want to know your brain science, it's called oligodendrocytes. It's so expensive. It's worth $1 million. Oligodendrocytes. So you know what this is for? It's supposed to help myelinate your synaptic circuits. Remember we mentioned myelin, allowing for greater connectivity between the neurons. It leads to wisdom. It leads to Sophie. It leads to intelligence. But you can see dopamine inhibits prolactin. Can you see the other irony there? That
Super ironic.
If your dopamine is high, your mind goes blank. So if dopamine is your only tool, trying to break expectation, trying to make people to want more, you have to be honest. If people are showing up in your session and they're addicted to the energy, you are using dopamine. So adjust. Use the noise app. Use more GABA-ergic mechanisms. Add more delta. Get people to rest within the system. If you see that they're anticipating, remember, like one of our worst fears is not giving people what they want. But so what happens when you give them what they want? They lose their mind because they're not able to myelinate well. So the oversimplification of the energy processes is spreading today does need to look at these elements now, because the adjustment is not much. You actually need to do very, very simple things in order to bring people into wisdom. And you know what that is? Do less. Don't work too hard. Don't try to keep getting a response from the bodies. Leave them alone. When you can see that maybe they're going somewhere, don't touch them. Don't poke them. Go to the other people who might need more support.
So the olive
Dendrocytes.
dendrocytes was a pair was related to the myelination.
Yes. If you draw, let's say, a neuron, this is a neuron with the nucleus, and then this is the dendrites. So a synapse is where there's a connection between one neuron and another neuron. So this would be a synapse. And then this would be an axon. The myelin would be the covering that protects the axon, strengthening the connection, allowing information, real transmission, neurotransmission, allowing information to be transferred between neurons much farther, like in a dream state.
Terms, it supports the insight.
Yeah, you can hold more information. If you want to build or organize your structure, myelination is really important. Now, what disease or illness is actually the deterioration of myelination? It's MS. It's multiple sclerosis. So if you're going to work with someone with MS, you want to work on GABAergic functions.
Repeat that?
Multiple sclerosis, MS. It's a deterioration of the myelin, the myelin in the white cortex, not the gray matter, but the white matter. It's the white brain.
Sorry, can you just repeat?
You know, like when you start seeing this, you realize that the thing that's actually overwhelmed is the hypothalamus. If the hypothalamus is overwhelmed with tasks, and then it hasn't processed fear, then it has a hard time managing immunity, metabolism. The thyroid goes out of whack, the thymus goes out of whack. Think of the thymus. The thymus is in charge of immunity. But did you know that the thymus starts to grow smaller after 13 years old? Or you actually start losing immunity by the time you go into teenage years. So if your hypothalamus is super busy with managing like everything, that's why sickness often occurs, because your master control system doesn't have the space. Your office, your studio is totally in disarray. It's so messy.
Another, like, if there's a biological purpose why the prolactin goes to the milk and so much focusing on the myelination, does it affect the myelination of the baby or no?
Not necessarily.
But what would be the biological reason then that the women are not supposed to myelinate so much that time?
I don't think it's an impossibility. If there were techniques that made sure that the mother aren't experiencing high stress, that they got support postpartum, and they did not lose their learning process. I think if mothers were still taking care of their mind, not just their bodies, whilst they're taking care of children, then they would actually grow with the baby. But very often, many mothers experience depression and then a lot of anger. A lot of the trauma that we hear has something to do with children not getting the proper attention because mothers did not have access to their whole being. Because all of these functions are so overstressed with producing energy for a baby, not having the usual habits. The mother barely knows herself. She's been tired for 9 months. And all the more, like she's supposed to. So a lot of you come from countries where single parenting is common, or there's a lack of basic support mechanisms that's usually coming from the tribal system. To even focus on bringing some support to that particular audience is something like Finland has been doing. They have this inner mama, inner dance community where inner dances are really just supposed to be for women. Women who either have given birth, about to give birth, or are not yet about to give birth, receiving support so that when the occasion arises, when they need to confront fear, when they need to grow up, it's never too early to heal the roots of society. Chicken and egg, right? Where do you start? Old people, young people, start with the hen chicken who will lay the egg. Take care of the hen, the eggs will be okay, and then the eggs will be other chickens, and then you heal the cycle. So the inner dance is a powerful water birth experience. The inner dance has been the most powerful mechanism to support pregnant women. Pregnant women never say no. When they show up, they're usually the most powerful spaces to hold. And then during the birth process, when they've practiced the labor stages, early stage, late stage, usually the baby just plops through. There's no pain, or there's little pain.
So then, are all playlists or waves okay for pregnant women, or is there something?
You have to design it. Normally, we even ask the mother to give their songs. And then we go to Logic Pro and then we put it in order.
Yeah, because I've heard like some waves shouldn't be.
The technique there is when the contractions are happening, you bring in the expansion. When
Doing birth, let's say that just pregnant.
Well, our more common task is to create a playlist during birth. The regular playlist will work for pre-birth. The problem with birth is it has to be longer often than like 1 hour or 90 minutes, which is a standard inner dance playlist. So you can either train the dad to handle the music. There are many things that you can do, but the basic formulation is when a contraction is happening, you hold an expansive sound. When the contractions aren't coming and the mother is tired, you bring in the energy so that the oxytocin gets released and then the contractions start to happen. So you can support the wave. When you look at the way the body goes in the inner dance process, it's exactly like birthing. How many people have you seen birth during the inner dance journey? It's the same wave. The autonomic nervous system with the spine is the same wave. Here's the secret. The spine of the mother needs to go through a certain action because the baby's spine needs to make this movement. Now, the least empowering position to give birth in is to lay down. The woman needs to have access to her dance. So what needs to happen is the spine of the baby and the spine of the mom need to find an exact spiral so that the head of the baby will go like this and then it's supposed to slip out. This word push is evil. It's supposed to slide.
That recently, that more and more in these times that it's said that it's about the space that's held from outside. That's the time, pregnancy and giving birth is the time where the natural playlist of the body is actually in its highest. So even with everything that's happening, like looking at this, that also all these waves in the brain are happening that we interpret as
Mm.
depression or something that
Mm.
it should be naturally going
Yeah,
on its
yeah.
own way
Yeah.
and happening because the body is finding its way to
Yeah.
hold space. So I'm actually going towards really not looking
Understanding it.
like how actually the bodies are the spaces or the space holders, not the people or not even the places
Yeah.
outside of the body, but to teach, like to for the mother to experience how the body is the space holder for the whole thing.
Mm.
So that's like kind of
It's so interesting to ask these questions, like who is the actual midwife? Is it the midwife? And then there's a reliance on the midwife, and then we realize maybe the father could be the midwife, but then the mother is the midwife, but then you realize the baby is the midwife. So the baby's autonomic nervous system needs to be in a sympathetic nervous system. It needs to be hitting the adrenergic receptors. The baby needs to be alive when it comes out. The mother needs to be in a parasympathetic nervous system. So when cortisol levels are high, and women are, let's say, in hospital scenarios where they're stressed out, cortisol will be up. And when cortisol is up, you know what goes down? Endorphins. And you know what endorphins are responsible for? Pain. It's supposed to help create a painless experience. So when you're not supporting the parasympathetic nervous system, you're not relaxing the mother, then once the baby's head starts to push against the pelvis and there's pressure, it's gonna hurt. And if you're not in the right position because you didn't listen, you didn't take the time or the space to go through the stages with pure connection, you're gonna react just to the pain, and that's gonna take over. That's gonna midwife the whole experience.
The brain waves. I am not deep in the study, but the brain waves seem to happen within, like the circadian rhythms. They go within a playlist in type of a rhythm throughout the whole pregnancy towards the birth, and then inside the birth, the brain waves itself they facilitate or they happen inside the body of the mother and the baby. So actually they are naturally there if that can be the leader of, whatever is happening.
Yeah, but hospitals don't wait, and that's why the stress and the complications with the baby, and it's a cycle of not the right birthing environment.
It's a cycle.
Altogether.
It's a vicious cycle.
Very vicious.
Yeah, if the mother is strong enough to stay within the playlist that is happening inside. So that's why also people ask, is it okay to bring a pregnant woman or allow them to come? Their body is in the deepest wisdom, and they will, the body will guide them through.
There has to be trust. Because as soon as you put fear into the situation, that's what happens to the sound is one thing. The wave needs to help, but the mood in the room is important. So what we don't allow in the birthing space is fear. Anyone who's afraid, get them out, because they will influence the mother. But what would hold that even more is perception. All these movies that the mother watched where they're crying, screaming, it's the most painful thing on earth. What does that do to the mind that this is supposed to be the birthing process? You need to change all of those completely.
There's one maybe Western perspective when it's really about if the core is the mother in trust or stress. So how does the birth process go? Because, for example, in Finland, people trust the medical system with birthing so much. So some people who are doing home births in Finland, actually when the process is happening, and it's scary because they never experienced it before, and then they trust the medical system more. So for some women opposite, they might be more in a trust space when they get to the hospital because it's in their paradigm. This is safe, now I can relax. And home birthing, it's really like a full trust, but then they're I know people who think I'm going to home birth, but in the end they go into such complications because underneath there is actually bigger belief system that I cannot do it alone. So then when they get to the hospital, they feel safe. Other way around, if it's always in the hospital also, and you're not even looking at this paradigm in myself, but where I'm coming from and what do I trust? Am I afraid to actually birth
Battery
alone at
30%.
home? It might be more stressful for the body than to try and push it because it's trendy or I want to do natural birth.
So,
But you have to, I think we need to also look, it's not black and white.
No.
Some environment is actually, to some women, feels more relaxing.
but about how, yeah, regardless of the surroundings that you choose to be, and the aim there is that the waves and the internal inner dance that is happening is the same transformational inner dance, and it's just happening right there.
Can I go quickly back to one thing? The mommy brain.
Yeah.
So prolactin goes to the milk, so cortisol is higher. Is that what you said?
No, we didn't connect the prolactin
sorry.
thing with cortisol.
Okay.
Cortisol and endorphins, maybe. Endorphins help to manage pain. They relieve pain.
It was maybe related that when the cortisol is high, so when the mom gets stressed,
Yeah,
like
cortisol.
actually the dopamine, like when they're in the stress, then these.
Then endorphins. It's endorphins. Oxytocin has a hard time raising up, so that's why they put pitocin as the to induce birth, just to give them like synthetic oxytocin. But if you want natural oxytocin to rise, cortisol levels need to be kept in check, and endorphins need to be set free in order to not let the vicious cycle of pain take over the whole mechanism. So this is my daughter. This is the second birth already, just to demonstrate what inner dance birthing is like. Oh, wait, I think the sound is important. It should be here.
So maybe to check in, like if the process supports the mother to find the trust within and to get to know their system already before the birth, so we are all kind of practicing also what's the trust.
Battery
And we're creating
70%.
the conditions, so then if we decide how do we want to be supported or support the birthing process, what are the conditions that creates the relaxation and trust to the space, and that person's belief system might, like we need to know where they're coming from, and if they go through this type of processes as a practice also how to find a trust from within the body, it all kind of supports that.
The volume's not coming out. Anyway,
You put it straight to the speaker.
I could, if it's worth it, I could try to connect it to the Bluetooth.
Connected to MacBook Pro 2.
Okay. Still no.
Connected to Ida Maria iPhone.
Sorry.
Try this one.
Ida Maria iPhone. Disconnected.
Ida Maria.
Connected to MacBook Pro 2.
Okay.
I love you talking.
No. Oh, here, wait. It's so complicated, my machine sometimes. Inner movements?
It's like
Yeah.
a neural
They look like
brain neural connection wire.
they all look like sensory neurons.
Never mind. It's okay.
AUX audio.
So I didn't even know that the baby was coming out already.
Okay,
Because she had just gotten into the pool. That's my ex-partner.
Yes, she's vertical.
Yeah. In the other birds, she was like this. She knew where the position of the head would be.
Vertical is the best because of
Yes.
gravitation.
Yes. Yes.
babies
Especially in the water.
Yeah.
Her last one was like that as well. She knew it was.
Yeah. Flora was managing the one before, the next baby. So you can see the mother actually takes charge. There's no weakness there. There's no stress there. She's totally just present because the music is in the background.
I had the same situation in my second one, but the fear was in the room. I was not in a
Yeah, the
place
smallest
where
thing.
the other people would be there. I was there, but then it was interfering.
But here we're looking at the body that she knows exactly what's going on with the body, and it's in full control, with full trust of the people around and everyone around, in full trust of the mother and the baby's power to that they are in control.
Yeah, and the baby's totally just there.
Yeah.
This is absolutely wonderful.
She never cried. She's cute.
I think many, because this is the third
That's like the
child,
first hour.
fourth child, and then the last workflow was the fifth birth. So many, I think also when we as women don't know what's going to happen, so it's rarely first or second birth that is just so trustful and peaceful, at least what I hear from our friends. But then when they get the third one or fourth one, it's like, oh, it's so easy, and then they give birth at home, or it's kind of like, it's also a learning process how much we can trust in it. I wouldn't like first time I do something like that. So that's why, okay, what if we energetically go through the birthing before and then gain the trust that there's a natural intelligence. I'm sure it supports.
It's so I was in her fifth birthing, wherein witnessing births, I feel is really just mirroring the inner dance process. Like on her fifth birth, she knew exactly, she was still working, and I was like, shut up, remove the phone, I'm going to do bowls on you now, lay down. And this is 2 hours before she birthed. She was still working because she was releasing an event. And I was like, now.
That's my ex.
You know, like, shut up. And I was like, just birth now, you know. And she knew her body very well, but it's very much like in the inner dance process, or probably any meditation practice, like when you know your body so well, when you know your process so well. She knew exactly when, okay, I'm gonna do the bowl now. Oh, the water's gonna come out now. I'm gonna go to the pool. And oh, the baby's gonna come out now. And later on, the placenta is gonna come out. Now you know very well where your process is. And it's the same with the inner dance, when you know exactly when you can just go into the inside, and you know how to work well with your GABA, as you were mentioning there, Pai. And there's no more need for the cortisol or the adrenaline or anything like that, because you almost mastered the process already. The last birth I was in Costa Rica. I almost regretted not taking over the space because the people didn't know me. Only the mom know me and know the process. And how I feel the inner dance supports a birth, pre-birth, is that she can kind of study her body process, her death process. And what I realize is so important in the birth space is the allowance of the space for the death, which is that deep delta could be as mirrored in an inner dance process, that deep death, which a lot of mothers don't anticipate, which I find so powerful. This can be also the part where the mother would say, I need to go to the hospital now, I'm gonna die. It happened in this 36-hour birth I witnessed the last time. I couldn't use my voice and the inner dance. I had to stop the inner dance because the people in the space didn't know the inner dance process. I could only hold the hearts of the birth keepers. And it's only after the 30 plus hours, she was in the toilet and she was already crowning. And I had to take over, and I had to sing really, really earthy, only then it was able to support the baby to come out, because I had to put her attention to her womb sound and do the and only then it gave her the mirroring, gave her the power to, okay, the power needs to be on my earth now, and remove all the fear of the because there's the doula and there's the midwife, which work on different sides of the brain. So the doula is taking her into her shamanic space. The midwife is taking her into her left brain. So there's a lot of commotion in the room. And when I found my portal, like, okay, now it's like floor's coming in and you have to go to your womb. Use your sound. Like I said, use your sound now. And it's just taking them back into the power of the body. It's almost really the same as the inner dance process. When we need to birth ourselves.
The center?
Like,
Yeah. It stays connected.
And what
it's
did
a
you
very
do with this?
powerful
It falls away
process
after
for
3
an inner
days.
dance facilitator
So in the
to
Philippines,
actually
they
be in a
believe it's a
birth-
spiritual twin.
in a birth space.
So you don't
It's a
cut
very
the cord.
powerful training.
So you can feel lotus birth?
Yeah, it's the first lotus birth in the Philippines.
You're not putting
She's
it
still
into
that
the
cute.
earth? No?
We buried it
She will
in the
bury
eco
it.
village.
Okay.
Yeah, you saw that she stayed in the pool because you have to give a second birth. You have to wait. Then more contractions come, and then you give birth to the placenta. Now in the Philippines, the placenta is a spiritual twin. And if you cut the umbilical cord, you separate. Because that's where the nutrients, the air, the waste is passing through. So why are people cutting the cord that early?
They sell the placenta.
But they could sell it, but they should wait at least. That's called delayed cord clamping. And that's actually the law already in many places, but it's still not being followed because it's easier to make money if you get that thing out the door as early as possible. So when the baby cries, that's the first trauma, when they get cut. So we didn't cut, it falls away.
It's interesting to reflect how this like
Look at her.
with Danu, when she's in the natural trust as also as an animal.
She didn't cry at all.
Yeah.
And then
The whole-
it's how,
the whole
how
time.
peaceful it is. This is a weird comparison, but with this, it's actually like this is so peaceful and natural. And I would like to put the next video about our cat who just gave birth for the first time, and it's hilarious because she's never. So when you witness animals birthing, we've had a cow and dogs and cats, and you see them, or that you see humans birthing. It's kind of the same witnessing for me, like how much there is trust. But the cat that was birthing for the first time, she freaked out when the first kitten came out, and in the video she jumps.
She didn't know what it was.
The kitten flies, and she's like, "What the fuck is that?" And she runs away, and I'm like, what did she do? She just, and that was the first one. And she went to her mom, which is our other cat, and she just rested, and the kitten was left alone. And I'm there, and there's like blood, and then the placenta comes, and she's again like, "What the fuck is that?" And it was so hilarious. I was like, okay, it's in animals too. When they do it for the first time, they still figure it out by themselves or in the pack, and it's so natural. But the next time, like when our dog gives birth, she's giving a lot of, it's so natural. She eats they eat the placenta. Everything is so natural. And like when I watch this, it's like it's so natural. There's some inner knowing that already knows what it is, like as an animal. But it's really cool to witness animals give birth, like without interfering. And then what about how do we witness humans give birth without interfering at all? Ask even like, what if there's no doulas or midwives and the mother
And the
baby-
first child was born the same way.
Yeah, his was even faster. He almost came out of the toilet because she thought she had to poop, and then the head was coming out. So you had to rush her into the pool, not even having time to put on the music. So this is a bit longer, just a bit longer. It's painless birth.
It's not her first.
But it was not
birth, right?
premature.
She had 2 other children, but they were C-section and like the typical, and she was so traumatized by that. So she had to prepare. And we were fully in this inner dance environment the whole time. She did so many inner dances during her pregnancy just to prepare.
And one thing about that was a beautiful, really beautiful video and about the cry, that in some, it's the cry of the child is also culturally
Yeah.
because required, because in the medical environment they need the baby to cry to know that the baby is breathing.
They will hit it.
So in
Yeah.
80s they would still put, or 70s they would take the baby from its legs and then
Yes.
so to kind
Yeah.
of like, okay, it's crying. Okay,
They don't know that
it's
they're breathing
nursery
through
now,
here.
You know?
They can swim underwater if they wanted, but
Yeah, yes.
you're not supposed to.
I don't think my babies did cry because I also got them right away to my, even if I was in a medical environment, but you know.
Okay, so I'm hoping you're getting a lot from this talk. So much is being unraveled in terms of fear. Now we need to see where this is taking us. And that's where the sleep playlists come in. What we're doing in inner dance is we're trying to achieve the REM state. Yeah? That's what we're trying to achieve. Whilst people are awake, and then when they go to sleep, they'll go back there. So what we're interested in now is how we can get people to achieve healing that happens in that magical space we call REM. So we discovered this last year where we introduced inner dance to children while they're asleep using the playlist systems. They're much longer. They're normally about 180 minutes long. A typical inner dance session would be 90 minutes long. Sometimes it could go on for as long as 3 hours, and we were really surprised at the effects. So a lot of the formulations we shared to you is very, very related to this, because what we realized the sleep playlist we're doing is it had the tendency to bring people into REM states a lot earlier during sleep, the sleep cycle. Like at the onset of sleep, when you expose people to inner dance, they go deeper, faster. So notice, I don't know if you looked at this before, but non-REM stage is more often during the first hours of sleep, and then it becomes lighter. So when you introduce delta, and then later higher gamma during the sleep stages, they can go into REM state earlier. And we think, and we need to do additional research with this, it has something to do with cortisol. Like if people can deal with their cortisol levels a lot earlier at night, then they can achieve REM state a lot quicker. So cortisol is really something we need to become friends with. And it feels like people can't deal with fear during the day, so that when they go to sleep, they're still holding a lot of their anxiety. So if we're working with doctors, we're going to be working with clinics and psychologists, this is the next step, because the sleep playlists are a lot easier to introduce in a clinical setting than just the workshops themselves. You're not going to get away from the in-person one-to-one holding space, because there's a lot of benefits in holding space in that way. It's more confrontational. It activates the autonomic nervous system in a way that's a lot more conscious. But to allow the healing of metabolism and immunity that normally happens in sleep, this is something you might want to get interested in. So after introducing this to you, we'll share with you the sleep playlists. If you want to use them in the plane, at home, or you have a sick child, or you're not feeling well, or you're experiencing sleep deprivation, experiment and then write feedback. We'll develop networks where a lot of that information gets shared. Sleep as medicine, vibration within sleep, all those like super interesting things. So I just wanted to also talk about that a little bit, because it's easier to understand what the sleep playlists are doing after a conversation regarding cortisol, epinephrine, dopamine, and a lot of those other things. So I think I can give you access to this particular set of slides. You'll see this interesting comparison here where you can start to think about dopamine along with the other neurotransmitters that would be different when people are awake or in non-REM sleep and then in REM sleep, so that when you're designing your process, how much would you like to borrow from wake consciousness, certain stage, and non-REM sleep, which is where GABA is super high, and then when REM is happening? If you want to be a kind of surgeon, an energy surgeon, you want to be a sleep scientist. You want to understand the circuitry and chemistry that happens in the 24-hour sleep-wake cycle that might change throughout the seasons, summer, winter, you know. Even just getting initially exposed to this, it will give you more layers to observe as you touch bodies, you know. You don't need to think about it too much. Just exposing yourself to more vocabulary should empower you guys to think about balance from a much bigger frame. Okay, so that's it. That's my morning presentation.
One more question.
Yes,
So
really.
what allows the
Rerouting.
of dopamine to the striatum, for example, is also the drops, the delta
Yes.
drops?
Yes. Yeah, because that's when you're not expecting. So even if people come with expectations, if you break that expectation midstream, then you're still able to do the rerouting in many ways.
You said something about the SAN supra is regulated by the hypothalamus.
The suprachiasmatic nucleus?
Yeah. What is the link with the pineal gland?
Okay, yeah, I shouldn't have turned it off, but we can explain this. No, the suprachiasmatic nucleus is in the hypothalamus, and that regulates the pineal gland. So what regulates the suprachiasmatic nucleus? The clock, right? There's an internal clock mechanism that sets the time for you to go to sleep, to release melatonin. So what is the regulator for the suprachiasmatic nucleus? It's light or dark. If you're exposing someone to light, then it triggers the release of melatonin in the pineal gland, and the one in charge of that is the SCN, which is inside the hypothalamus. Did you get that? The suprachiasmatic nucleus is the internal clock in the brain that tells you when is it time to get stressed, when is it time to rest, when should I trust, when should I fight. That even if it, you know, for those who travel and you know jet lag, you have a clock, and no matter what's happening outside sometimes, because your clock can be conditioned, the hypothalamus actually is that which is programmable. It's a suprachiasmatic nucleus. So
And this is affected by light.
light and dark, yes.
That's why the melatonin
It's the stimulus.
and pineal gland are connected.
The stimulus for the SCN is light or dark.
So, if that's the internal clock
Yes.
to dreams wake cycle,
Yeah.
and then there is
It's the traditional clock anyway,
Then there is another clock
in the heart.
the glutamate and
Yes,
GABA,
in the dopamine, yeah.
and they are related to.
And then they're
And then
they're actually connected to the heart as well. Because remember, everything starts with the hypothalamus. So if you speed up the cortisol, epinephrine, SA node heart rate, that's going to send signals to the hypothalamus. Even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to go to sleep. So we want to maybe correct the statement that the main stimulus for the suprachiasmatic nucleus is light or dark. But because people are exposed to light at abnormal situations at night, people are drinking coffee after 8 p.m., people are changing the clock. They're actually messing up the clock. So we should not be surprised that human beings are super confused.
Another question. In Kundalini yoga tradition, it's not advisable to wear the hair on the front because
It covers.
yes, it covers the pineal gland. Pineal
Yeah,
gland
yeah,
must be
yeah.
exposed to the sun rays and to the light.
Yeah.
Do you see the relation?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Doctors are
So,
saying
for
like
example, the ladies who likes to cover
Yeah.
this
sunglasses are so bad. A lot of scientists are saying throw away alarm clocks because it's only when you get up that you're supposed to get up, and when you keep trying to condition the clock, you're waking up harshly sometimes when you haven't really fully gone into an entire cycle. So they're measuring now that there are certain times of the day where you might get cancer more easily, where you do better in an exam, where you might end up in an accident. So you really want to respect the cycle, even as the cycle will undergo changes. Because if you do this work, you have to observe that you will alter people's cycles, what are called circadian rhythms and infradian rhythms. Circadian would be 24 hours, and infradian will be anything beyond 24 hours, which includes for women the menstrual cycle, which does undergo many changes when you do the work. A lot of you probably noticed in you or in other people, the month goes kind of weird sometimes when people do inner work. That's the infradian rhythm. So there is an alteration as well hormonally when we alter the whole mix of endocrine signaling messengers.